welcome Conservative Party State Chairman Jerry Kassar. We're back with a great guest on a very timely topic. We are joined by New York State Senator Dan Stec, and the topic is the ongoing walkout in the New York State prison system. And there have been a lot of developments and a lot of things are happening, and Dan is the person who will be able to bring us up to date and let us really know where this kind of emergency situation is going. In general, with these podcasts, we bring political leaders, civic leaders, community activists, and newsmakers to your attention. We do them regularly. It's a Conservative Party activity. And we feel that over the last 2 years, doing 40 or 50 of these things has really been a great benefit to the general public. They end up going on our YouTube library, and they're always available for you to take a look at. So let me tell you a little bit about Dan. Dan first served in the New York State Assembly. He was there for, I believe, something like 8 years. Then from there, he was elected to the New York State Senate. He represents the North Country, 6 counties in the North Country. And Dan has a 100% Conservative Party rating, our legislative rating, 100%. He's a close friend of the party. He's been supported by the party from day one. And actually, you were supported by the party when you were a local elected official, too, if I recall correctly. Yeah. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dan to the show. And how you doing, Dan?
Good, Jerry. Thanks for having me on.
Very welcome. So let's go right to it. There's been a lot of developments in the situation concerning the correction officers walkout, but to get a little bit of a better understanding, many of these prisons are actually in your district. Am I correct?
Yes, I have 7 prisons in my district right now, and in fact, 4 years ago when I first became senator, there were 10. So we've seen 3 close. But I represent more prisons than any other legislator.
And how many prisons are there that have been affected by this strike in the state?
Well, there's 42 in the system, and almost all of them. I think the number I've heard a couple different numbers, 38 or 40, but almost all of them, and certainly all the ones in the North Country.
As far as strikers, the number of people that have been on strike, I know at one point I read something like 13,000. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, at the beginning or early on, there was, the vast majority of them, and a number of 12, 13,000 was reasonable. And, we're 3 weeks into the strike now, and a couple of agreements or almost agreements or alleged agreements later. A lot of people, momentum being is what it is. A lot of people have gone back. The National Guard is in there. So the current number right now, it might be a few thousand. But early on, there was almost all, most of them were out.
Well, I know it's not really about wages, and I also know that there has been a back and forth between Doc, the governor's office, the individual correction members, and the union. And it seems like it's a start and stop sort of process. Yeah. Could you go over with us what the issues are, what the current status is, and your hope for the your hope as we move forward? Because, I think all our hope is it just comes to an end, but it has to come to an end that is fair for everybody. So if you could address that a little bit.
Well, absolutely. And absolutely, right now it's not a good situation inside these facilities. It's not safe for anyone. You've got a small staff supplemented by untrained National Guard members, and people are tired, and inmates are getting frustrated because their programming has stopped. Their routine has been severely curtailed. So, inside right now, people are getting frustrated. This started 3 weeks ago, and it was an unauthorized, the governor's called it an illegal strike. It was in violation of the Taylor Act, which prohibits prohibits government employee unions from striking. And that should tell people a lot, that these people were so frustrated with this situation that they took the risk and they did violate the law. So, but unfortunately, that has complicated the process because it wasn't authorized by the union, yet everyone that's striking is represented by the union. The union is the group that the state is going to deal with. And the union leadership is trying to do that. But so on the one hand, they didn't call the strike. They understand the issues. They know what's concerning the people that have walked off the job, and they're trying to represent those interests. But the governor has been looking at this through the lens of a collective bargaining agreement, and she's been very candid about that viewpoint in her communications with the public. She would have the public believe that, hey, these guys are on strike even though they signed a contract a year ago. I don't understand why, and she's offering money, and this is, she is driving the discussion that this is about money. And for anyone that's been paying attention to corrections over the years, since we went under one party rule, there's been a spate of anti-law enforcement, pro-criminal legislation that's passed, whether it's bail and discovery reform, or or parole reforms, or in this case, in the correction system, the HALT Act. So a few years ago, the HALT Act went into place, and while some of it is geared towards improving programming for people inside, and trying to make their situation a little better, it also took away a lot of the behavioral control tools. And
So
really,
I had heard you have a bill to can you talk a little bit more
Sure.
about the HALT Act? I don't think you'd put a bill in to repeal it if there wasn't a very problematic piece of
Correct.
law.
So in 2021, the legislature debated the HALT Act, and on a almost strict party line vote, every single Republican voted against it. There were a handful of Democrats that also voted against it, but basically a party line vote. And the HALT Act really gave a lot of disincentives to inmates to behave, and little consequences. And this is a group of people that if you're going to reward them for bad behavior, and a lot of the way that HALT is written and implemented, it does reward and encourage bad behavior. I've had honor block inmates tell me that people that are in the HALT program, people are in the special housing units, have more access to tablets and outside communication and services than people in the general population. So, you're sending the wrong group of people, the message that if you behave badly, you will get a better deal. So when that bill passed, a lot of people said there were going to be problems with this, Republicans, corrections officers, and it fell on deaf ears. They passed the bill, and Governor Cuomo signed it into law. I picked up the pen and I wrote the repeal HALT bill. So I've been carrying that, and Assemblyman Simpson carries it in the Assembly now, but that would undo the HALT Act. Now, the legislature has been heading in a path the last few years of doubling down on their policies. But now the HALT Act has been in place for 2 years, and what we have? We have data. The Department of Corrections has been collecting data for years on assaults inside the prisons, and both the statistics for assaults on staff and assaults on other inmates has gone through the roof since HALT was implemented. So there's all kinds of factual information to point to now. And you add to that the short staffing, mandatory overtime, where these are corrections officers that are sometimes being forced to work 24, 36 straight hours. And if they don't do it, they get disciplined. That's an unsafe situation that's been going on in almost all these facilities for years now. And then, I think of late, there's been more chemical exposure. So there's a contraband problem in there. I had 25 people in one of my prisons in Malone in Franklin County go to the emergency room one night in January because they were exposed to something that was making an inmate intoxicated. They never did figure out what it was. So then you start looking into contraband and you see that, hey, we've got body scanners that the taxpayer paid for, but the Democrats in the budget bill in 2023 wrote the law to make them optional to visitors and optional to inmates. And these are the same things that, if you're getting on a plane at the airport, the TSA is going to scan you. And if you refuse that scan, you don't fly in that airplane. But in our prisons, an inmate or a visitor can just simply say, I don't want to be body scanned, and they're allowed to have that contact visit. And that's where a lot of contraband is coming in. So there's been a series of things. And again, these are largely in law, whether it's the HALT Act or the body scanners being optional. So they're frustrated with that, and that's the reason why these guys went on strike, is over safety concerns, well-documented safety concerns. And unfortunately, the governor and the union are in a position where they can't they can't negotiate legislation. The governor needs to engage the legislature in this. And 3 weeks into the prison, she said nothing about acknowledging the safety concerns and acknowledging that a conversation needs to be had about the HALT legislation and either repealing it or significantly amending it to address these concerns. So that's why they've been slow to come back, is that, they're seeing these agreements that are coming and being signed, but, they're largely not getting at the root cause of their concerns.
Well, this points me in the direction of two questions. First, my sense of downstate Democratic state legislators is that they are completely oblivious to the seriousness of the situation and take a view that these are convicted felons. They're in prison. They're not up for trial. These are convicted felons that they somehow have become the victims, as opposed to the personnel in the prisons, of which we've seen, not surprisingly, a number of YouTubes and videos, TVs, showing the intense violence that they suffer under. Could you speak to me for a moment about your colleagues, Democratic colleagues, frankly, from the downstate? And then from there, what I'm going to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about the governor and the commissioner, please.
Okay. Regarding, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that brought halt to us, brought a lot of anti-law enforcement legislation, they do truly feel that the system is unfair, that somehow criminals and inmates are the victims of the system. Very frustrating. Obviously, we can point to some horrific events inside our facilities lately that are inexcusable, and the justice system is going to take care of, what happened to Robert Brooks at Marcy Correctional back in December. But somehow, that is just added to their argument that the whole system is broken, and that everyone in our Department of Corrections staff are bad people, and they're just they're victimizing inmates. These inmates, those that are still in prison in New York, because we've let a lot out lately. We've legalized and decriminalized a lot of stuff. The people that remain, by and large, a lot of them, very violent histories, very violent convictions. And so, I've been in all 7 of my correctional facilities a few times now in the last few weeks, and I've talked to hundreds of corrections officers. And one of the things that jumped off that page is the chair of the corrections committee in the Senate, Senator Salazar. Her name is very well known amongst the corrections. In fact, I kid these guys. I'm like, my goodness, I think that my own constituents in the North Country that are COs, she probably has a higher name recognition with them than I do. And but what I've explained to them in talking about that, they're frustrated with her. She's been the champion of a lot of these changes, and specifically, she was the sponsor of HALT. But she, I tell them, the thing is her name. But there's 20 or 25 other colleagues of hers in the Senate and probably 50 to 70 in the Assembly that live in the New York City area, don't have a single prison in their district, which means they also don't represent a single corrections officer. So these are people that are anonymous to corrections officers, and they share her viewpoint, and they're going to vote with her, and they voted to bring us HALT, and they don't feel any pressure. They're not going to run into some, corrections officers' families in the store like I will, and have to answer for their vote or answer for these policies. So there's no pressure on them to get it right. The only pressure they feel is the pressure that they sense to try to do right by the inmates and make their life easier in prison. They shouldn't be horrific places, but they shouldn't be country clubs either. And for the life of me, the statistics again are there that there's been a significant spike in violent assaults on inmates and on staff over the last couple of years, and everyone is pointing to HALT as the reason. And if I could just get my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to acknowledge that officer safety is inmate safety. That if officers aren't safe inside our prisons, that means that what HALT prohibited was essentially a jail within the jail. That within a prison, you still have a society, there's still a pecking order, there's still some that are more violent than others and will prey on the weaker ones. Where you got to wait in line and you're going to pay a bribe of cigarettes in order to use the telephone to call your home. That's what it's like. That's the inmate society inside the prisons that are controlling their movements. And I want, and I would think that the public would want, correction staff in charge of the prisons, and and HALT emboldened the worst of the inmates, and we're seeing that in the statistics.
What about the governor in many areas has shown a lack of leadership, but if this one might stand out greater than others because of the overall public safety aspect of it, and the fact that these are all state employees that she is, been so heartless with, frankly. And the commissioner seems to be carrying out her orders or lack of orders, and bringing in the National Guard almost seemed, it seemed very counterproductive, and really didn't bridge any problem here. My question to you is that as we're talking, they're attempting to bring the correction officers back into work, and there's been a lot of threats involved. But it also seems that the governor still is not showing a real concern for what their actual issues are. I mean, these people want to get back to work. So what I am asking you is what's her story? Why does she seem to be so oblivious to what's going on here? And why does it seem like the corrections commissioner is on Mars where the correction officers are on Venus? I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, certainly, speaking briefly about the governor, I mean, whether it's, a skill set that she's lacking as far as, seeing what's going on here, or the people that are around her. I mean, I wouldn't expect any governor to be an expert on every aspect of the state. That's what she has commissioners for. So I do lay a lot of, her shortcomings in this process and her lack of knowledge. I mean, she said famously a couple weeks ago, a week into the strike, she didn't know what the issues were. I mean, I find that hard to believe. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt and say she inartfully was trying to articulate that she, that it was an unauthorized strike and they were, they felt like they were dealing with individuals and not the union. But that isn't what she said, and that's not how she sounded. But so I do lay it at the feet of the commissioner. Commissioner Marticello is the guy that's supposed to be advising her what's going on. He's well aware of the shortcomings of HALT. And I mean, I've spoke with him and he acknowledges them, but he correctly points out these are in law and he can't ignore the law. So he knows what's wrong with the law. He needs to be the person, advising the governor. This is why they're striking. These are the issues. He can show her the same data. And I don't know if he has and she's ignoring it or if he hasn't. But, we've had several monumental failures in the last few months going back to Robert Brooks's death. But, then, those exposures in Malone that I talked about and losing control at Collins in Western New York. And then the commissioner announcing that their solution to the staffing problem was to say that 70% staffing is now considered full staffing. I mean, that's ridiculous. That, why don't you just say we're going to knock off 30% of everyone's sentence or we'll eliminate 30% of the penal code? I mean, it was just an asinine thing to say. They've walked that back, but I mean, they've made a series of errors. I don't know how the commissioner can continue on. I don't think he's got the faith or trust of the employees under him. And I think it's important for the public to realize we're talking about state government as an employer. We have an obligation to our employees to give them a safe work environment. I mean, they are routinely being assaulted and having feces thrown at them. I mean, imagine working in a workplace where you're told you're going to work here for 24 hours straight in a dangerous environment with people that might want to harm you. And on top of that, you're going to have urine and feces thrown at you while you work. I mean, that is unacceptable. That should be a low bar as an employer for the state of New York to cross. But here we are, and again, a week in, she's not sure what the issues are, and again, she hasn't. Her reaction to the strike a few days after the strike started, her 30-day budget amendments were due. Now, not to get too wonky, but the governor puts in the executive draft budget in January, and then 30 days later, the governors have an opportunity under law to make amendments to their own proposal. Instead of, after the strike started, instead of saying, you know what, I want to revisit HALT, I want to revisit the body scanners and do some fixes legislatively, her reaction instead was to ask the legislature for permission to close 5 more prisons. So she immediately went to hardball. The Taylor law requires a 2-for-1 docking of pay if you go on strike. But in addition to that, the governor has threatened them with arrest. The governor has canceled health insurance. So you got families with little kids, and their reward for complaining about their safety in their workplace is that she's stripping them of health insurance. I mean, it's mean spirited and petty. And again, nowhere has she said, I acknowledge that there's parts of HALT that are broken and are making your life unsafe and the lives of the inmates in your care unsafe, and I want to fix that. She hasn't done that yet. And so part of the the hesitance that I've sensed from those that are striking is that the agreements are short on making any attempt to promise a real fix legislatively. The closest that they've come is that there's been an agreement to create a committee to study and talk about it for 60 days and then make a presentation to the legislature. That does not have a lot of teeth. And as a legislator, I can tell you, I'm pretty sure where that discussion post-budget will go. If the governor was serious about making a legislative change, she would be doing it in the context of the budget negotiations. But she hasn't done that yet. And, I think either she knows she can't negotiate that with the Democrats in the legislature, or she doesn't want to do it. She disagrees with it. She hasn't pursued that yet.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, good that you're on top of the situation, but bad that and today is a big day. I know where they are trying to, with some half measures, trying to get the correction officers to come back to work. But it struck me in that there was a lot of shortfalls in what they were proposing for the correction officers to come back. In a way, in some ways, all they're proposing is that the threatened punishments go away as opposed to fixing the conditions. And I'm sure that has not been lost on your constituents.
Well, I think that's exactly it, and again, I mean, I'm not going to advise anyone that's striking what they should do. I mean, I want the strike to end. I want our prisons to be safe again. I want these guys to go back to work, these men and women to go back to work and do their job. But I want them to gain from it. If their safety concerns aren't met, then you question, what was achieved here. Talk is cheap, and when the legislature says we're going to study something, we'll receive your report. If I had a nickel for every report that's made and put on the shelf around here, I could retire.
Yeah. I want to change we're coming to an end, really. I'd like to change the topic for a moment. You've indicated an interest in seeking the 21st congressional seat, which is being vacated by Elise Stefanik, the United States designee for ambassador to the UN. How's that going? Where are things right now?
Yeah, well, it's true. I've expressed my interest, and I've been speaking to a lot of people, as have others. Elise was a fantastic member of Congress, a good friend of mine, and I'm proud of her. I think the North Country can be proud of the work that she's done, and so much so that President Trump has seen fit to tap her to be his UN ambassador. She's one of the hardest working and most intelligent people I've ever worked with, and I know she's going to do a phenomenal job for us in the UN. But yes, that would create a vacancy for her, and there's not one yet. There's a lot of speculation, but I think accurately so, that because the margin in the House of Representatives is so close that they're waiting for some special elections to occur in Florida, and get through some key budgetary related votes in the House before they'll confirm her and actually create this. So I think the process has gone on longer than a lot of people thought it would. Most other cabinet level people were confirmed in January or early February. Her holdup isn't because they're going to have a hard time confirming her. That's going to be an easy vote. They're not releasing her yet because they continue to need her service and leadership in the House. But it's 15 counties, so it's a big district. It's, I think, the largest geographically, I think, east of the Mississippi. So there's a ton of moving parts here, and the strong point for me, obviously, is that as a state senator, and this is my 13th year in the state legislature, I have represented or currently represent nearly half of the congressional district. My whole Senate district rests within it. And I've been vetted by the voters many times. I've been in politics long enough where people have an idea of how I do business, who I am, how hard I work, and can I be trusted, and do I represent them well? And I've been reelected a few times now, so I'm a known quantity, and I think that's how I've been trying to present myself to the people that ultimately will be making this decision. And I'm just honored to be considered, and hopefully things, from my perspective, I hope they go my way. But I think we're looking a few more weeks before we know.
Well, glad you threw your hat in. I know there's support for you within the Conservative Party. We like a number of the candidates, but we have had a long relationship with you. I mean, there's no denying 100% Conservative Party rating, and we gave you an award just a few weeks ago for that rating. You. Has to be taken very seriously by the party and the voters. So I appreciate you.
I've got it right here, Jerry.
Got it right there. So there it is. So, well, thank you on that. So let me just thank you for appearing on this show. I think what you've told us, we're going to have this out right away, is very interesting, and more depth than we get from reading a newspaper or just catching a story. And I particularly think for a lot of our viewers who do not live within an area where there are state prisons, or at least prisons that are on strike, that it provided a lot of depth that they just would not
Yes.
have really heard before. Now, do you have any last words for us?
Well, to that point, yes, thank you. Those that live in a prison community, they understand. These are their, their spouses, coworkers, coworkers, the little league coaches, and they understand, and they've heard the stories over the years. But if you don't live in a prison facility, and furthermore, I mean, again, the way that the governor has tried to pitch this to the media, suggesting it's about money. If this was a group of guys weren't happy with the contract they just signed last year, and they wanted another buck an hour, and people were like, well, I'm too bad. I mean, I think I'd be in that camp too. Hey, you know what? Everyone wants another buck an hour. But that is absolutely not what this is about. They're very frustrated that it's been suggested that way to the media by the governor, that it is somehow about contractual. And again, people need to understand that the union is confined to what they can negotiate in the collective bargaining agreement. So people are frustrated. Hey, how come they're not fixing the legislation? I mean, the union has told the governor's office what the issues are with HALT. But it's got to be the governor's office that says, I hear you, I'm going to engage the legislature. And she has not done that. And I guess the last thing I would want to point out is in these negotiations, the governor hasn't sat in these mediations. In fact, I've not heard that many people at all from the second floor have been involved. The union has been meeting with Commissioner Marticello, and he's been representing the administration at the table. So he has ownership here. You're asking him to critique himself. I personally think that it would have been more fruitful, maybe outside of the mediation, maybe outside of the collective bargaining agreement mindset, to say, hey, you know what, we need somebody other than Commissioner Marticello to say, yep, and you asked me to check my own work, and I'm doing a good job, Governor. I mean, that's not going to move the needle on fixing these safety concerns. I really think that by now the governor should have made a public statement saying, I acknowledge that the statistics are there, that the prisons are not safe anymore. And I'm hearing that it's because of legislation, and I'm willing to sit down with legislators to try to get that done. And unfortunately, in Albany, the only way to get anything even remotely controversial done is in the context of the budget. And the good news for the governor is that, Governor, we've got a budget that's due in 3 weeks. And this should be something that you add into the discussion with Carl Hasty and Majority Leader Stuart Cousins to try to resolve this, to bring that back so that they're safer and the inmates are safer.
Dan, thank you for all you do. And this has been the Patriots Podium, a regular podcast by the New York State Conservative Party. I want to thank Andrew Davis and Katie Mahone for helping make these podcasts possible. And once again, this is Patriots Podium, and I am Conservative Party State Chairman Jerry Kassar. Thank you for listening.